How you tell your story can actually help heal your relationships. In this video, I'd like to share a story that one of my clients gave me permission to share. After working together, we healed the story itself, switching from themes of victimization to themes of empowerment. And in doing so, we also helped her heal her relationship with her mother. It was really beautiful, and I'm so happy to share that with you. So stay tuned to hear that whole story. My name's Allisonlorne. I'm a certified nurse midwife, and I help people recover from difficult and traumatic childbirth experiences. Please download my free postpartum care checklist. It's full of tips to create more comfort and ease in the postpartum period. And click the link in my bio to visit my website. There, you'll learn more about my offerings, including my online community, which is geared towards uplifting and supporting one another through healing after a difficult birth, as well as my one-to-one coaching that's available. So let's call this patient Sarah. She came to me as she was getting ready for her second delivery. As so often happens, a subsequent pregnancy can bring up the trauma of a past pregnancy. She had a very difficult birth, and it had stayed with her this whole time. This was years later, and she had recognized that it was difficult, and she knew enough to reach out for help in healing it. But in the first couple years after taking her baby home, she was just overwhelmed with all kinds of appointments, supporting her family, getting back to work, running the household, etc. And she hadn't been able to really attend to healing the trauma of her first birth. So when she realized that she would be faced with another birth, she actually was really terrified. And she reached out to me to work together. Luckily, she was local. We got to work in person. And she just was a beautiful case of how healing this trauma from a previous birth can have this ripple effect and help out so many other relationships in your life. So, as far as the story goes, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I don't want to get into too many details, especially because some of this can actually be triggering for people that have gone through similar things. And the goal in the work is not to become re traumatized or triggered by the work. We want to titrate our emotionality as we're doing the work. So when things become too overwhelming, we step out, take a step back, and ground, breathe, just take a break. Notice our surroundings, tune into any of the five senses, anything you can hear, see, smell, taste, or touch that will bring you back into the moment, back into your body. What happens when you're telling stories is the subconscious doesn't know that it's not happening right now. And that's why your body responds to when you're telling a story. You might have noticed if you've had a difficult birth and people have asked you about your birth story, that you might have some anxiety come up, like increased heart rate or shallow breathing, maybe even sweaty palms or an upset tummy. And that can all be signs that there's unresolved emotional weight around that story. So Sarah came to me ready to get into the healing work around her first birth. She had had a somewhat complicated pregnancy from the get-go. She had a pre-existing medical condition that put her at higher risk, and the pregnancy was full with extra appointments, extra level of concern than she had really anticipated or saw coming. So I think she was already primed for some anxiety around the birth, the upcoming birth. Um, as it happened, she ended up having to be induced. The labor was protracted. She was in labor for a couple of days. She finally got to complete. And this is when things really took a turn. And it was the most simple thing that happened that unfortunately set up a domino effect that Sarah really felt like she was out of control of her circumstances and had fear for her well-being and that of her loved one, the unborn child. And those are the two conditions that are met when trauma occurs, that you don't have control of your circumstances and that you have fear for your well-being. So what happened was that the doctor came into the room. Sarah was complete and ready to push. And she had actually been pushing for a little while. the doctor came into the room and the doctor said, "Let's get this show on the road." And it doesn't sound like anything that terrible to have said, perhaps a little insensitive. And this is what really stuck in Sarah's mind. Suddenly, she felt like she was under a ton of pressure to perform, and she felt like this wasn't about her anymore, that it was about the doctor, that she was on some sort of schedule that she didn't know even existed. And it had this cascade effect of making her feel totally out of control, making her feel like she wasn't doing anything right, making her feel completely disempowered. She was able to push and still participate in the delivery. And what so often happens in these cases is that we shut down our emotional processing just in order to get through the moment. And birth is intense. There's a lot of other things happening. There were other people in the room. The level of demand was placed on her higher and higher to perform, to push harder. And she gave birth successfully, and the baby ended up in the NICU for a couple of weeks and went home without any further complications. But all of that was enough for Sarah to feel incredibly traumatized by the experience. And as so often happens, she minimized what the doctor had said and what the turning point was for her, and really blamed herself for not being able to pull it together better or be happier in the postpartum period. So we see this so often, especially as women being trained to be people pleasers. We put our own needs on the back burner. We think that we should be doing a better job of making things easier for other people. So Sarah really didn't feel like she had the support, the bandwidth, the recognition to even understand that she had a process of healing that would unpack all of the events that happened in her birth. And it was a really far cry to think she would be able to distill it down into one moment. Well, when we were working together, reviewing her birth story, I could tell the language, the tone of voice that changed when she was telling the birth story. And we were able to pinpoint this point in time when the doctor walked in and said, "Let's get the show on the road." Surprisingly, or I should say maybe not surprisingly, because I've been doing the work enough to know that so often seemingly innocuous things that get stuck in the mind often have a connection to something else that was bigger and that was in existence before the event took place. And that's what happened in this story. This statement, "Let's go at the show on the road," is something that Sarah's mother used to say to her all the time when it was a high stress, high stakes situation. So, whether it was a sporting event, "Let's get the show on the road," something was about to get started. Her mother, she had a memory of her mother even saying it, sitting in the car outside of the in laws before going in for Christmas dinner, "Let's get the show on the road." And it was kind of what her mom would say to herself to try to psych herself up. But the translation to Sarah felt like she had to perform, like she had to keep her mom safe, like she had to do something to make sure her mom was going to be okay. And her mom was in the room at the time of delivery, and her mom didn't even register that the doctor had said this. But it had triggered in Sarah the memory of having to perform for her mother. And this, for the a couple of years in between her and her next pregnancy, she had always just hated this doctor for saying that. And when we got into tapping into where that emotional pain lived in her body and using some embodiment practices, some movement strategies to help breathe through that discomfort and find the story behind it, Sarah recognized that the bigger story was this tension she'd had with her mother. So, in healing the birth story, we shift the narrative from the external focus of how things went down and turn it inward and observe our own feelings, emotions, reactions, and responses to the things that happened outside. What Sarah did was shut down that part of her brain that needed to emotionally process what was happening when she got triggered. She went into performance mode. She's somewhat dissociated because she doesn't remember much of what it felt like to be in her body at the time of birth. And that's just classic trauma response type of behavior. Going into a fight, flight, fawn, or freeze response, which I go into in a previous video if you'd like to check it out. Those are all trauma responses that we have. So, really, this fawning, this people pleasing, like behavior that Sarah was used to doing when she was with her mother that said that thing, then she got into this position in her birth. And now she's performing and trying to please the other people in the room just to try to keep herself and her baby safe. It was emotional. The work that Sarah and I did together definitely had a lot of release, definitely involved tears and emotionality and rewriting the birth story, imagining what that doctor could have said that would have felt more supportive, what Sarah could have said in the moment to advocate for herself. Playing this through with a different kind of script and really inhabiting what it would feel like to be empowering in that time really was the key to unlocking Sarah being able to see herself in a different light. And this had everything to do with preparing herself for her upcoming birth. I'm happy to say that her second birth was uncomplicated. It was smooth, it was quick, and she was able to be really present the whole time, like she had hoped to be in her first birth. She had a natural delivery and she called the birth redemptive. It was one of her stories that she was happy to share in birth circles with other moms. And it really will go down with me as one of the most successful stories I had ever worked with. She is a shining star, and I'm so happy to know that her and her family are doing so well now. So I just wanted to give you an example of what this work can be like. This is a simple example given some of the more egregious traumas that some people go through in childbirth. But again, I wanted to keep it simple so that it was relatable and that it wasn't going to be so triggering for a lot of people. When we do get into this work, it's often in the private one to one that people will share with me some of the most traumatic things that they've ever encountered. Childbirth, unfortunately, can be full of difficulty and trauma triggers. So I just want to bring this work forward and help people know that there's healing available. Healing the birth story not only is a good step for you and your emotional well being, but also can help you get the birth that you want and a subsequent delivery. It can help improve your relationships with your loved ones and in your family. It can create more presence and confidence in yourself. This work is outlined in my 5-step process that's available in my workbook for purchase. And you can read more about it on my website. As I mentioned, that link's in the bio. I invite you to join our online community. It's a growing community, and I facilitate these groups. I'm really focused on helping people help each other, hopefully finding some friendships that come out of being with like-minded individuals that are focused on solutions and personal growth and that have gone through similar experiences. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this is helpful. My name is Allison Lorne, and this is Holistic Birth Recovery. Follow along for more related content. Thanks again.